Welcome back. We're going to talk about the 4 important terms in your own occupation policy language that you need to understand before you stop working or appeal a denial. Are you ready? Okay, let's take this apart. The 4 important terms within a definition of disability can include the term 1, limited, 2, material duties, 3, substantial duties, and 4, regular occupation. So let's unpack this. The term limited means that you must not be able to do all of the important tasks normally identified with your occupation. So it's important that you get from your employer your job description and compare that job description with what it is you do every day, day in and day out. I suggest that you write out your version of your job description and compare it to what your employer has told the insurance company your duties consist of, because you want to make sure that you're on the same page either with your employer or that the carrier is on the same page with you. Now, the next important term is one we see all the time. That's material and substantial duties. That's a term of art. That means that those are material and substantial duties that are required for the performance of your regular occupation. And if you admit one of them or you modify them, then that's not material and substantial. So let's say you're a dentist and you have carpal tunnel and that prohibits you from holding your instruments. Well, that certainly is a material and substantial part of your duties. You've got to hold instruments. And if you can't do that, you can't perform dental procedures. So you're eligible for your benefits. Let's break this down a little bit. Material duties, what's that? Those are characteristic to your occupation that are qualitative in nature. If the duties are eliminated, then the occupation as defined would not exist. So material duties refer to specific job-related tasks. And as I said, it's a question of qualitative measurement. What are substantial duties? Now, those are tasks that represent the largest proportion of the total task done in an 8-hour day. Now, a substantial duty is recognized if that duty is eliminated. And if that was eliminated, then you couldn't do your occupation. It wouldn't exist. These are quantitative, and they suggest that the performance of specific occupational duties of more than 4 hours per day would be considered to be quantitative. So substantial duties are referring to the time spent as identifiable from a quantitative determination. So in general, duties that require more than 20% of your workday are material and substantial in nature. So again, if you are the dentist and you are spending 80% of your time doing dental work, that dental work is a substantial duty. And if you can't hold the instruments to perform a root canal or a crown or whatever it is you're doing, then you can't do the material duties of your occupation. So it's qualitative and quantitative. The next key definition is regular occupation, and that means the occupation that you were routinely performing when your disability began. Now, disability policies have different standards. There's no one gold plate definition. Group long-term disability ERISA policies generally require that the insurance company look at your occupation as it's normally performed in the national economy instead of how the work tasks are performed for a specific employer, a specific location, or a specific job. So if your employer has modified this job because of local or regional needs or because they just want it done a different way, that's not the standard that the disability carrier is going to use. They're going to look at how that regular occupation is performed in the national economy, not how you've done it for that employer. Now, there are some policies that actually do require the insurance company to look at your occupation as is performed for your employer or your local economy. And that standard is important because, again, you would prefer to have your occupation measured by how it's performed for your employer or how it's done in the local economy than how it's done in the national economy pursuant to the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. Now, when you look at your disability policy, you don't see that that policy insures your job. It insures the occupation. And again, the issue here is what is your ability or inability to perform your occupational duties pursuant to the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. Now, I'm going to give you an example of how this plays out. My client was a 54-year-old manager at Costco, and he worked there for 20 years. He supervised 15 employees. His job at Costco required him to assist the drivers in unloading the inventory that weighed as much as 50 to 60 pounds, stack shelves, including climbing ladders going up and down, and he had to manage the inventory, sales, and employees in his department. Unfortunately, he began to have problems with an inner ear infection that ultimately affected his balance and coordination. The disability carrier paid his short-term disability benefits and about 12 weeks of long-term disability benefits. But he was notified by the disability carrier that the occupation of a retail manager, which was described in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles, didn't require lifting, stacking shelves, climbing ladders. And as a result, they said, haha, we're denying your claim because that's what you were. You were a retail manager. But the reality was that his restrictions and limitations precluded him from bending, stooping, twisting, lifting, climbing ladders. So the issue was, well, could he do his present job? What was his present job? Would he get his long-term disability benefits? Well, the disability insurance company insured his occupation as it was performed in the national economy. When I looked at the DOTs, the lifting requirement isn't there. And the DOT defined his job as mostly supervisory and administrative. So he wouldn't get the benefits if the insurance company can show that he was physically able to perform those duties that were supervisory and administrative in nature. Now, he came to me and the obvious question was, can I win this claim? Now, remember, the term material duties refers to specific job-related tasks. It's generally qualitative. And the term substantive requires, or substantial refers to the time spent. It's an identifiable quantitative determination. So in this case, I had my own vocational counselor involved in the case. We got from the employer his job description, and we got him to write down his job description. We took apart both the material duties and we took apart the substantial duties. Now, the retail manager's position required him to be able to do supervisory and administrative work. But because of his problems with balance and coordination, he had difficulty sitting, standing, looking at a computer, turning his head side to side and up and down. Those duties required more than 20% of his workday. And we were able to argue that he was unable to engage in both the material and substantial duties of his occupation. Now you can see we had to take apart his occupational duties, and we had to look at the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. We had to do a quantitative measurement and a qualitative measurement of his job duties before we were able to convince the disability insurance carrier that in fact he was unable to do the material and substantial duties of his occupation. It's extremely important that you understand this basic concept of what's covered by your policy and whether or not you are having to meet a standard of your own occupation as performed by your employer in the local economy or the national economy. And once you understand that standard, we've got to get out the Dictionary of Occupational Titles and analyze what are the material and substantial duties of your job to determine whether or not any of those require you to do more than 20% or spend more than 20% of your workday. Then we've got to analyze your medical and condition in terms of your physical abilities, your cognitive abilities, your psychological abilities, or your social behavior requirements, because we need to determine what problems you're having from each of those standpoints and add in medications to determine whether or not the combination of one or all of those things would preclude you from doing any of the material and substantial duties of your occupation. Got it? Okay, so, but what happens after 24 months of own occupation benefits? The definition of disability is going to change from an inability to do your own occupation to an inability to do any gainful occupation for which you are reasonably fitted by education, training, or experience. That's called the change in definition period from own occupation to any occupation. It's a crucial stage in your claim, and I'm going to be talking about that in next week's episode. Well, that's it for this one. If you like this podcast, consider liking our page, leaving a review, or sharing it with your friends and family. Remember, our podcast comes out weekly, so stay tuned for another insightful episode of Winning Isn't Easy. Thanks.